Welcome back to Stories from the Ashes, where we pontificate on good books and the stories that define and refine us. I'm Amber, here with Amanda, and Val has returned again. Welcome, Val.
Thank you.
And today we're just going to be talking about some of the books that we've been reading recently that we have really enjoyed and think you might enjoy also. Amanda, do you want to get us started?
Sure. This book that I just finished will make quite a splash, not really, because it is not very highbrowed or literary. It's literary themed because I was at the beach last week with my family. So I read Death Comes to Pemberley.
Oh, nice.
Which if you're looking for a good beach read and you want a murder mystery that is not at all serious and with characters you already know, it's the one to go with because
and it's clean, right? Like it's
clean. Yes,
not
it's
a
very
bodice
clean.
ripper.
It's no, I mean there's some Wickham is in this book, so there's some of his shenanigans that you can expect to see, but nothing more out of the more inappropriate than anything that's in Pride and Prejudice. So that one was really fun for the beach and just kind of a guilty pleasure. I don't like murder mysteries, but this one was fun. So
because it was Austen. So
because it's Austen,
people
everything
you know.
Austen is fun. People you know,
Yep.
get a whodunit,
Yep.
and that was last week's beach read.
I saw a meme earlier this week that said something to the effect of, no, I think you misunderstood me. When I said I don't like drama, I mean I don't like being involved in drama, other people's drama. Yes, sign me up. And so
yes, very much like that.
That's probably what it is. It's like, we know these people, they're our friends. Now tell me what happened again.
So. Yeah. Yes.
Oh, that's
very
funny.
much so.
Val, did you have anything a little less highbrow than usual?
Well, no, I actually thought Amanda was going to say she read Beach Read by Emily Henry.
Oh, I've never heard of that. Is that good?
Yes, but it's got some inappropriateness to it because it's a beach read. You just sit down and you read it. And it's, romantic comedy essentially in book. And I got really excited because I just finished it last month. It's not actually typically a book I would read. I don't care for fiction, but I needed something fast and easy and just kind of shut my brain off. And I enjoyed it so much. I got the next book that we had of hers at our library. Yeah. Can't remember what that one's called. The Book Lovers or something like that.
Okay. Anyway. So would you classify that as a beach read then, or?
Yeah, because a beach read to me is a book you throw in your beach bag. You go to the beach, you sit under those beautiful umbrellas. You have a lovely cold drink in your hand and you can quickly page through it. And when you get done, you're like, that was cute. And then you move on with your life. It was a great story.
In my case, it has to be light enough that you can watch the kids.
Yes. So they don't drown.
Keep track of them so they don't drown. Yeah. And go back and forth without losing your place too much.
Yeah, absolutely. And Emily Henry is an excellent author of fiction. I guess my friends at the library all read her, so they really enjoy her. So.
Oh, cool.
Nice.
Yeah.
I should have probably recapped this at the beginning. So if you all did not have an opportunity to listen to the episode where Val was here before, Val is a secretary of the board for her small library here in Iowa that 7 years ago was a private library and has segued into the public sector, which is a really cool conversation and very interesting if you feel like listening to that episode. But that is why Val is here, is because she does a lot of reading for her library, and her library.
That's not the only reason she's here.
We also really just love talking to her. Yes, but that was why she was here the first time. The context of her being here the first time with Charlessa. But Val shared last time that her library is mostly Amish romance and not hardly enough nonfiction for her taste. So I brought a book this week, Val, that is nonfiction that I think would work really well at your library.
Okay.
And I'm excited to share it, but you go ahead and share a book that you brought.
The one I just finished, which I'm not ever quite sure how you ladies do this, but the one I just finished was called Wintering by Katherine May. You want easy reads for the summer, but the books I want to talk about today, if we have a chance, are not easy books at all. This is my light
This
summer
isn't a
reading.
Summer episode. This is a
okay.
Whatever we've been reading lately.
Yeah.
I have books. I've been reading books on crucial conversations, Grown and Flown, because I just graduated my first child, 13 Ways to Kill Your Community. I'm doing a little research.
Yeah.
And then my favorite poetry book from last summer, which was All Along You Were Blooming. But the book I just finished called Wintering by Katherine May, it's not an easy read. It was beautiful. I said to Ambre a couple of times, this book is wrecking me. It's taking me so long to get through. And it's just it's called The Power of Rest and Retreat in Difficult Times. Mm-hmm. And I just think it's applicable for the conferences I'm going to this year. People are talking about finding joy in rest or finding rest, period. Mm-hmm. And this idea that there's ebb and flow to life. And I really love that, because sometimes we get caught in the idea that, okay, things are going really well. This is normal. But actually, this author says that's just one part of normal, because there's so much ebb and flow to good and bad all throughout our lives.
Absolutely.
And it was so beautiful and breathtaking, this book. And so it's called Wintering by Katherine May. It's amazing.
So would you recommend that for if you're going through a hard time, or
just understanding how life works in general?
Yeah, absolutely. If you're going through a hard time, this is a book that will help you feel like what you're going through isn't abnormal and other people are going through it. I mean, this lady's from England and she's talking about things that have just in the last 2 or 3 years affected me. And I think, oh, weird. You just think we're ocean away from each other. And yet here we are dealing with the same thing. But I had a friend recommend this to me in our little antique store in town. And she actually was not going through a season, but she had a friend who was, and it just helped her really understand that. Mm-hmm. And then I ran into her recently and she says, I'm now in a wintering season. And it just helps me to know how to encourage people that are just trying to figure out life. And when I'm finding when I graduated my first one, I'm in this weird, I don't know how to parent a child I'm not actually schooling. So that feels kind of weird. But then to meet with this lady who says, I feel like I'm entering a wintering season, to know that I can encourage her without being condescending or patronizing or the good old American, just buck it up and things will be better type of a thing.
Yeah.
There was just some really beautiful energy about this book that I just really enjoyed.
Yeah, that sounds like a really good one.
Yeah.
So that was kind of serious, so I don't want to go on to something funny, but
no, go on. Good segue.
I did really like this book. Okay, so first of all, I was like, I'm bringing all chapter books and I'm going to be a big girl and I've read these chapter books, so I'm going to bring them and talk about them, and I'm not going to talk about any picture books today. I realized this morning that the reason I've been so irritable since last night was because I had told myself that, and I was so upset because I had these picture books that I wanted to talk about that really touched me. And you know what? Maybe it's because I have been in what feels like a fairly nonstop wintering season for the last few years, last 10 years, the last decade since probably the last 9 years since our eldest son really got mobile and his autism became very visible and was really challenging. It's felt like a storm ever since then. We went from that to my dad passing to multiple miscarriages to, our own adult diagnosis of all these neurodivergent stuff and more kids getting diagnosed and then our house fire. And it's just, I just want to breathe. And, we've been home for 6 months and we just had to take down our ceiling in our main living space because all of our ductwork is sweating so much that it was going through the ceiling. And it's just oh, come on, Lord, either come back or just pause. I'm just so ready for a pause. But in all of that, the small bites of picture books are such a balm to my heart, because that's about how much information I can take in a lot of days is I can sit down and I can read a picture book. And so this one I really liked. It fits with my theology really well. So it's by Alice Walker, who won the Pulitzer Prize and the American Book Award for The Color Purple. And I didn't realize that she wrote any children's books, but she wrote this one called Sweet People Are Everywhere. And the way this works with my personal theology is I feel like a lot of books say that people are good, and I struggle with that because the Bible says that no one is good outside of who we are in Christ. And so I see people who do good things, but I think that's really a hard identity, because even myself, like, I don't consider myself to always be a good person. Like, I'm very flawed. I'm human like everyone else. And I think that that can be a very confusing word to use with kids when you're trying to teach them the nuance of humanity, right? Like, somebody can be a really good person, but have this really big blind spot in their life, or it seems like they're doing good things, but they're really evil. And so, how do we handle that? But I think that the people who are sweet are not evil. And so this book goes through, and it goes through, because you think of like grandmas, right? Like, your grandma is sweet and she's not going to hurt you. If you have a sweet grandma, you might have a grandma who does good things, like not let you starve to death, but she's really a cruel woman. So I think that it's a good difference word. So this is Sweet People Are Everywhere for young Byron, who is getting a passport. And it just goes all around the world. So we have a breastfeeding mother in Turkey in her hijab, and then we have United States and Afghanistan and Canada. And so it just says some of the people in Turkey are very sweet. And it's a some, it's not all, it's some. Like, you're going to find some sweet people everywhere, just like you might find some evil people everywhere, because that's humankind. So in Canada, too, some of the people are sweet. In Mexico, you will definitely meet sweet people. And it just keeps going all around the world. But something that I really liked, and I had wanted to see, sorry for smacking my mic there. I'd wanted to see when this was published. It's probably one of those books that tells you on the back page. That still throws me. Yes. So this was published in 2021. So I appreciated, given the nuance of life, right, that we have a page that says, and in Russia, people are sweet. And then there was one other page. Oh, right here. If the sweet people were the leaders in historically warring countries, they would treat each other much better. And so I thought those were very just good ways to talk about some of the hard stuff that happens around the world. And then and then there's this page that says, being sweet, they must not be disappeared. We are lost if we can no longer experience how sweet human beings can be. Oh, this was the one. So it says at the very end, promise me never to forget this, no matter how far you go or who sends you. So this could be a really good book to give to a soldier who is shipping off for the first time. Like, they're being sent somewhere else, and you just want to remind them, people are sweet. Like, don't lose track of who you are and what you know to be true. And Alice Walker said that she wants children reading this to become familiar with the idea that other places exist. And then there's just this really nice interview with her. When did you start writing? Do you like to travel? Besides being a writer, you're also an activist. What kind of causes do you work for? And then there's notes on the illustrations that cover all the different places that are covered in the book. But I just thought there were a lot of places covered that you don't see covered a lot. There are a lot of places covered that historically are warring with one another. There's a picture of Palestinians and Israelis playing soccer together. It says there are sweet people in Palestine, there are sweet people in Israel. And I really liked how it was presented. I think sometimes people are pushing one particular worldview or another, and this just wasn't. This is true. There are sweet people everywhere. Everywhere you go, even within your community, in different neighborhoods, you're going to find sweet people. You're going to find the not so sweet people, the get off my lawn sort of people, So I thought it was really relatable and a really good book for kids. But then that last line about no matter who sends you, remember this. It's like, that's really good. So it makes a really good gift for people who are deploying.
That book dedication was to someone at the DMV. It makes me want. Yeah.
It said Byron, who is getting his first passport.
Oh, so at a government office of some sort, maybe.
Well, maybe Byron is a friend going on his first trip.
Yeah, Byron could just be her her grandson or someone getting
that
their
makes
first
more
passport.
sense. I'm visualizing her meeting this boy at this government office and being like, there are sweet people everywhere, even if they're not here.
Listen, have you guys been to the DMV? Maybe that's where this book needs to be placed. Oh, man.
Oh, my.
Amber, I just want to say to you, you were the person last fall, actually, that you encouraged me to start reading children's books because it teaches you about emotional intelligence and it teaches you amazing historical facts and it tells beautiful stories, all within the span of like bedtime, which is about where my brain was the last fall. And I am now a champion of those kind of books. In fact, we had a memorial come into our library and the librarian and I had already been talking about how are you going to spend the money? Because it's her job to decide. And she says, oh, we're going to fill our children's area.
Yay.
And I'm really excited about that. So a book like this, I think, too, because we have such a polarized world right now, that I have to remind myself, too. I mean, we just came back from Portland. So the Iowa version of Portland is that they're all a bunch of hippies and, you know, whatever. And they're kind of mean and they don't like anybody outside of Portland. That wasn't what we found at all. It was so refreshing. So your book, actually, when you said it, I was like, I just lived that when I went to Portland, Oregon. Such kind people who love humanity. And there are kind people. And then, of course, there aren't because there was terrible things happening while we were there, too. So, and that reminds me a little bit of that ancient writer Plutarch, always handing us good, bad, good, bad, good, bad.
Oh, yeah.
Because we live in a weird world where you're like good until you're bad. Yeah. You're good. Okay, now we've canceled you. You're bad.
Right.
Well,
and there's not those shades of gray that we all need to see.
Yeah, and I think of books, Purple House Press just republished The Bargain Bride. Have you read this, Val?
No.
It is a very interesting snapshot in history. So it takes place in Oregon, and it involves a child bride because during the westward expansion, if you were married, you got double the land. And so people were marrying 10-year-olds and just leaving them with their families, going out, establishing a life, and then coming back and getting them when they came of age at 15. So in this book, we see a 35-year-old man marry a 10-year-old girl, reassure her that she gets to stay with her abusive sister-in-law and brother-in-law because she's an orphan until he comes back for her. So he comes back for her. She leaves with her mother, Shaw, basically, and goes to his farm. And Evelyn Sibley Lampman wrote this, and she handles it very well by having the gentleman who seems to genuinely be a good, kind man. He has made a very nice home for her. He is well respected in the community, but he passes away that day. He has a stroke and dies. So now she's a rich widow, and she has to navigate her in-laws coming back and wanting her good fortune.
I think they were her aunt and uncle.
Yeah. I thought it was her older sister, but yeah, it could be her aunt and uncle. But they want her good fortune, and then obviously a lot of gentlemen callers are going to start coming in the spring because she's
that was fascinating.
And she's like
courtship
15.
rituals among farmers are very different. But I think I could get on board with them.
He came and did all her plowing for her.
They did all her farm chores. They did all her farm chores to show that they could properly run a farm.
Yeah.
Wow.
But in this story, there's a woman in town, Aunt Lizzy. Is that right, Amanda? I think it's Aunt Lizzy.
I don't remember her name.
We're going to call her Aunt Lizzy for the sake of this conversation. And she takes the young girl under her wing, and everyone loves her and respects her. And she grew up during the White Man Indian War. And so she has some opinions of Native Americans, having seen them kill her friends and family, that are no longer valid, right? So her opinions come out of this time of war, but in this new time period of peace, it's racism, right? She's just racist against the Native Americans at face value. So the nuance of Evelyn's storytelling is so well done in that we see this good woman with some bad ideas that come from her place of trauma. And then we see that her nephew has grown up in a different time and place. He's grown up where he had Native Americans as friends because there was nobody else to have. And so his dad encouraged those relationships. And so now he even speaks some of their language and is able to trade and considers them to still be friends and has these different relationships. So as this young girl who has no experience really with Native Americans is battling this doesn't seem logical. It doesn't seem logical to me that two different types of humans would be so different from one another. And so then the voices that she's hearing are Miss Lizzy and Jeb, and just being able to, this is what Evelyn does so brilliantly that makes me love her books, is you have such a great view of the person's thought life, like as they're battling with different thoughts. And then they come out at the end and they're like, this is what I believe. And that's just so good how she does it. And she does it with so many different things. She does it with how people look. And are we going to judge people based on how they look in one of her books? And she does it with, is somebody innately evil because they were born without married parents? Is the sin of the father carried down onto them, and just seeing children like battle through that. And then in this one, battling through, are you innately less than just because you're Native American? And so I just thought it was so wonderfully done. But that's what I'm thinking with the canceling, right? Like a lot of people today would be like, oh, we love Aunt Lizzy. Oh, but we're going to cancel her because she has this opinion about the Native Americans and is giving bad advice. Whereas it's like, it's more nuanced than that. She is a sweet person. She is a good person who has personal trauma and had these really bad personal experiences and is clearly still struggling. And we can hope that as she sees the younger generation interacting with people and sees that they are no longer at war, like she probably still inside has PTSD and thinks they are still at war. And so her opinions are not, even necessarily at large, but just like, these Native Americans in this community have tried to kill me before, and I still feel like this is happening. So just being able to read through that story with kids and be like, this isn't just cut and dry. These are not just situations where people are just racist because that's who they are. They hold some beliefs that we would look at and say is racism, but for them is probably really just trauma. And to just struggle through that in these time period pieces and not just judge them based on the lens of today. But I don't even know how I got started on this, but I love that book. The Bargain Bride. It was one of my favorite books when I was younger.
I love that at the end of your podcast, you give the list of the books you've talked about so that people like me can go back. I don't have to sit and listen with a notepad in my hand and go back and find the books you've talked about. So list that one so we can.
Yeah, definitely. Definitely. Yeah. So Purple House Press just brought it back into print, and I was so pleased that Jill was willing to print it the way it was written instead of making edits for today, because republishers have that ability, right? Like we see The Good and the Beautiful doing it all the time, making what they call clean copies, where they might take out that someone was smoking a cigarette or might take out a word that someone said, which, I mean, that's their prerogative, and some people appreciate those stories. But I felt that what somebody just reading through it, if you just read through it and did a word search, and it's like, every time I see the word engine, I'm just going to swap that word out. The problem is, in that situation, in this book particularly, the languaging helps you know about the people who are using these words, right? So if everybody is just saying Native American, then the vileness of this Native American's white husband who has thrown her to the side for a white wife, you're not really going to see just how wicked he is and just how selfish he is and how he truly feels about the Native Americans if his language isn't setting him apart from the people who are friends with the Native Americans, right? So like if everybody's just like Native American, you're like, okay, well, they all just feel that these are Native Americans. Whereas if this one person over here is like sarcastically and rudely using other terms, that just helps inform you about that person, right? Because what comes forth from the mouth is in the heart, and we need to be able to see into the heart of some of these characters in books so that we can know them faster. So I really respected Jill's willingness to print a hard book the way it was written so that older kids can wrestle through it. The main character is 14 turning 15 when the book opens. And that's probably the age that I would recommend reading it with kids is 15 and up. Just because there's no need to read it younger because there's a bajillion books for younger kids.
Right.
And this is a really good book to wrestle through with older kids and to walk through it with them.
And that is the age when kids really start wrestling with what they're seeing in culture, what they're reading in books, what they're seeing at home. That must be a brain thing where they're starting to kind of piece their world together to make it bigger and broader and stronger.
Yeah. Yeah. I appreciated it. So I didn't even bring that book today. That was not one of today's books.
It's a good one.
So what else do you have, Val? You shared some great titles.
Yeah, this one called Grown and Flown was recommended to me by my friend Tracy. It's Lisa Heffernan and Mary Dell Harrington. And she's like, I don't know, I'm hearing a lot of buzz about it. I'd like for you to get it and read it because you're going through it. So I ordered it right as my daughter was graduating, and I picked it up and read the first couple chapters. And I was like, this is really for public school kids, of which I do not have. And I thought, so I'll just set that on the shelf. But over 4th of July, we too went on a little trip. And so I grabbed it and I thought, well, I'll just read it and it'll be what it is. It reminded me a lot of a book I had my daughter read this year for her senior year called Adulting, which was literally like a hilarious book to teach you how to be an adult. So it was like, if this light comes on in your car, don't freak out and use swear words. Instead, put your cell phone and call whatever, right? But it's Grown and Flown is just from a mom and dad perspective. So the idea that like you feel like you've trained your kids really well. And then when you send them off to college, which my daughter is not going to college, but I am sending her into her adult life. The thing that struck with me is there will always be gaps. And I've been talking about gaps a lot with people. Like we all have it in our education. We have it in our marriages. We have where you can't know everything. I mean, that's the glory of life, right?
Very true.
In Grown and Flown, she was saying, make sure when your kids are leaving that they understand how sick is sick enough to go to the emergency room and that there's a phone call they can make before they go to an emergency room. But then this idea of like, if they haven't connected with people, they're going to go by themselves to this emergency room. And she was like 500 miles away from her child. The child comes down with a sickness and says, what do I do? And she says, go ahead and call urgent care. If they want you to come in, you're going to have to go. And this child, just being in college a couple of months, had 2 friends that are like, we'll go with. And it ended up being like spinal meningitis. This is like hospitalization, really scary, really bad. But in the first 24 hours before they knew what was going on, and the mom is like, do I go? Do I don't go? Those friends stayed at the hospital. They contacted the college to let them know what was going on. So the college would be in contact with the parents. I mean, it's just really good, solid advice for parents trying to raise good adults. Cause I want my kids to have amazing adulting skills, but it never crossed my mind that if my kids are away from me and get sick, will they know what to do? Because I'm just mom. I swoop in and I kind of do the mom thing and whatever. Right. So I thought that was really interesting. And of course it talks about, financial independence, understanding budgets, understanding money, not living outside your means, particularly while you're in college or in the first couple of years when you're working full time. And I just think our country needs lots and lots of conversations about this because we can have our kids sit through a class in 9th grade in high school in the public school system, or even have them take little classes at churches or at community centers. But really, your kids need to be handling money, and they have to be making some of these mistakes in small order at home so that you can kind of see the propensity. I mean, I have one kid who won't spend a dime, so she misses out on amazing opportunities and sometimes on hydrating herself well because she does not want to spend any money going into the store and buying water when if she were home, she could just get a free drink of water. I was like, you missed it because it's 100 degrees today and you should have gone and bought the water because now you don't.
Right.
And I have another daughter that the minute she gets a penny in her hand, it's spent. I mean, she already has 65 things she's going to buy. So the minute it comes into her hand, it's gone. So I think as parents, just having that ability to see the tendencies our children are going to take, and then we can gauge it accordingly. But Grown and Flown by Heffernan and Harrington, I at first was going to judge it and decide I did not like the book. But it turned out to be a solid read, like a little guidebook for like, oh yeah, I forgot to teach that. Oh yeah. So I'm going to hang on to it for at least the next couple of years as a reference because I've got 2 more kids coming up the gangplank. And I just want to be able to hand them some solid things that I wasn't handed as a child, and I kind of had to learn through trial and error. And then, of course, that idea of knowing that life is just about trial and error. Sometimes we can't teach our kids everything, but I do want to set them off on a good.
So how far before your children are out of the nest would you recommend reading this book? Like, would you recommend right before they leave, or right after, or a couple years before?
Probably a year before, so that it's fresh in your mind of the things they're going to come into contact with, that you're just to give you the idea that you're sending them out into the world and they're not going to stay away from things that are bad from them. I mean, again, our propensity is to go towards those things like a little robot. However, I mean, I read it this summer after my child has already finished school and is kind of moving into her adult life. But I think it's good information for adults as well, just to like, am I thinking through that? Do I have those kind of habits in my life already, or whatever that's looking like? So I would say probably a year before you're going to. My kids are 14 and 12, the two that are still at home. So I have 6 more years before my 12-year-old is 18. So after reading the book now, I can probably just make it more obvious to them when I make doctor or dentist appointments, or when we walk in to the appointment, to say to them, this is now your appointment. So go up and let them know what your name is and that you're here. And they're going to hand you forms and then bring them back to us, and we'll fill them out together, type of a thing. It's just the things the moms do, and we don't think about it because it's just easier if we do it, just, clickety clackety and get it done. But to be able to hand it to our children, for them to be responsible for their own thoughts and ideas, their own health, their own money, and be able to set them on a good foundation before they leave home. So I would say at least 1 year before your child is leaving the nest, but then I'm going to use it as a reference for the next 6 years. And there was a lot of like safety with internet things as well, or as our world is changing, some safety things. My guess is in 6 years, this book is going to be outdated. We're going to be in another avenue. And so then I'll probably find another one that I'll be able to pull from, or maybe they'll update this one to add the new cultural thing. So,
yeah, I like that. No, I've been thinking that the last couple weeks. Inara's 15, and just being like, does she have what she needs? Will she have what she needs to launch? Because we're thinking about high school now, right? Because she'll start her freshman year here. And I keep coming back to, for me, I probably did not have educationally everything that I needed. I mean, I started college at 16. I tested in, so it was no biggie. Like, I had what I needed to get into college. But did I know everything that probably would have been useful for me to know? No, nobody caught that I had dyspraxia and was really struggling with math more than just being stubborn and lazy. And so in those areas, it hasn't mattered, because as an adult, I love learning now more than I did then. And so I have the rest of my life to learn anything that is of interest to me. But the things that I really struggled with were the areas where I was not taught to regulate my emotions. I was taught to shove them down and to be quiet. And I wasn't taught how to handle traumatic situations. We just didn't talk about them. And so things of that nature, I really want my kids to know how to handle them. Those are the things that I feel they're clay for right now, that they'll really struggle as adults to not have. And so I think that's part of why I feel so strongly about all the emotional intelligence books, is just giving kids even just, a basic spine that they can then fill in through personal experience or watching others, but just to even be able to identify, oh, that's what this person is doing right now. They are handling their grief in a healthy way, or, oh, they are not handling their grief in a healthy way. And that's what we're looking at. And I know that we do a lot of, or because of me, we talk about bereavement and grief a lot. But one of the books that I always see most recommended in the group on Facebook is The Memory Box, a book about grief. And I think I may have read it a few years ago, but I read a lot of books a few years ago and it didn't stand out to me. So I checked it out from the library again so that I could intentionally read it and have a formed opinion. But then I also checked out The Treasure Box at the same time. And so last night I sat down to read some books before I took them back to the library, and Inara saw that I had the treasure box on my short stack of books, and she walked into the room and added the memory box. And I was like, oh, did you like that one? And she's like, oh, you just need to read it side by side with the treasure box. I think that'll be important to you. And I was like, oh, okay. Inara curates for me. She's my own personal librarian. So
that's awesome.
She reads through most of the books before I do, and then she'll tell me, oh, you can just pass on that one, or I think you'd really like that one. So, but she was not wrong. So the memory box and the treasure box are both very similar, as the titles might suggest, but they are written in very different forms. So the memory box is very much musings and thoughts. So the girl says, sometimes I wish I could still give you a hug. I would hug you so tight in a great big bear hug and never let go. And she talks about making the memory box. And I look around and remember, and it makes me smile, but I always think of you. So many things remind me of you. So it's very short lines and just her little thoughts as she's processing, and the person has already passed. So that's where the memory box is. The treasure box is very much a living book. It's a full story, and it takes place before the grandpa has passed, when everything's fine. The grandpa and the granddaughter are forming a memory box together. They call it their secret box, and they put things that they find in it. And so you see the grandparents coming for visits, and the little girl showing the grandpa the things that she has in her box. And the illustrations are gorgeous. Like, I can just hear this little kid laughing in this picture as her grandpa is holding her snake skin and feeling all like about it the first time. And so then we go through the grandpa going to the hospital and her visiting him there, and then him seeing it says, when nobody is around, I show him 2 new things I found for the treasure box. He likes them so much, he cries a little. And just realizing he's probably crying because he knows he's not going to be adding things to the memory box with her anymore. She thinks it's the items were so moving, but it's clear he's in his own grieving process there. And then he passes. And then the first time the grandma comes back to visit. So it goes through the funeral and the funerary processes and how she can't eat the cakes. And the pictures of him when he was much younger with smooth skin and barely recognizable to her. And so then the grandma comes back and she sits quietly with the granddaughter and says that, your grandpa gave me some things to give to you, and he told me that you would know what to do with them. And so it's 3 little trinkets in the grandpa's hat. And so the little girl shares her box with the grandma, and they're able to remember together. And it says, I sit in Grammy's lap. I miss his funny faces. I finally say, I do too, Grammy says. We sit and cry and think about grandpa for a long time. I put the magnifying glass and watch in the treasure box, but not the little blue cap. We will use it when we go for a walk to find interesting and amazing new things for our secret treasure box. So then it's her and her grandma carrying on that tradition. So I really liked it because it was a full story. And I think that I connected to it better than to the memory box. I like the memory box. I can see how that would be really good. It asks some existential questions and just musings that a kid would have. So it could be really good for a kid that's just wondering why and is just going through the process and feeling the sadness. But this one felt like it had a lot more hope, and it also had the beauty of being able to see that relationship. So I felt connected to this kid because I know this kid's grief. Her grandpa is who she lost. Whereas in the memory box, like, it could be anybody, which again could be great for a kid because it could be anybody. So they can imagine whoever they want into that space. So these are 2 just really good. If you like the one, you'll probably like the other, of the memory box and the treasure box by Dave Keane. So
is this the type of podcast where we can have conversations about grief?
Yes.
Yes.
Okay, so that book, Wintering by Katherine May.
Yeah.
So she talks about how culture wants us to stuff things down. So earlier, Amber, you were saying, I just learned to stuff emotions. That's why emotional intelligence is so important. And I think we're finding now, after, I keep saying 2 or 3 generations, because I think a generation is 25 years, right? Does that sound right?
I think so.
So like 3 generations, 75 years ago, that was World War II. Mm-hmm. So people came back from World War II, and we kind of have this idea of like, suck it up. They just went back to work and did everything great. But actually, we all know they had these coping techniques that maybe weren't the best coping techniques. And then families started to falter a little. And then the next generation faltered more. And then the next generation faltered more. But this wintering idea with Katherine May in that book I had read talks about grieving what you thought you were going to live this ideal life. Yeah. And then it didn't happen. And then people are dying and you're almost shocked by it. Even if it's a grandparent that dies, you feel shocked and a little bit like the world has hurt you in some way. Yeah. So I think it's really important that we begin having conversations about grief and we begin really kind of pulling into our grief a little bit to say, this isn't quite what I wanted for your life, or this isn't, you know, we thought we were going to have more time with grandma and we didn't have more time with grandma, and being honest with our emotions. I mean, we don't need to be toddlers with our emotions who really can't regulate them. But I think there is an honesty that needs to start. And I think maybe, Amber, just because you mentioned it last fall, do things in our culture start changing because children's books begin being written about them? I'm wondering if that's a thing, because I'm starting to see lots of things. Yeah. I mean, in the book Wintering, she's grieving that through an illness she did not ask for, and then the depression, anxiety that comes with that. She's mourning and grieving the job she worked so hard to make herself feel so important in actually doesn't matter anymore, and she ends up having to give it up because she can't physically do it anymore. And then she's kind of in this who am I moment, which I think grief opens that up. Like, okay, who am I? And am I leaving a legacy? And is it a good legacy or is it a bad legacy? Are my relationships intact and in order? Because we aren't guaranteed tomorrow. So, it's interesting that the children's books you just mentioned then are talking about that, you know, about big, hard feelings and hard things happening in life, instead of like, just sweep that under the rug and let's pretend that didn't happen, to say, well, it is happening and we have to deal with it.
I feel like even we have this internal dialogue. It's not even just outside people telling us to sweep it under the rug and move on. We have this internal dialogue. I have some friends who are going through a very hard time. Someone they loved and trusted tried to hurt them very badly, and they're like, I can't sleep. Well, maybe you shouldn't be able to sleep. You went through something really, really traumatic, and just sleeping like a baby's not something you should be expecting of yourself right now. You shouldn't expect that you're over it, you know?
Right. And can I ask, with either of you, are you having middle of the night wakings up? Because that started for me when I turned 40, where at 3:30 in the morning, my eyes popped open. I thought something was wrong. It lasted 2 full years. It just ended back in February, where from 3:30 to 5:30 every morning I was awake. And at first I thought, something's wrong. It's clearly wrong. Then I thought, well, maybe the Lord wants to meet with me. And then I thought, man, my family's sleeping. I'm going to get the bills paid. I'm going to wash the dishes. It morphed into this thing that actually once I realized it was going to happen every night, I was like, okay, well, this is what it is. And I had my little routine in place. And then my friend Tracy also said, in fact, it's mentioned in this Wintering book, that all over the world, cultures find themselves awake, and they have created these little routines of prayer and of housework and of meeting together, checking on one another, particularly before technology. If you look out your window and you notice your neighbor's candle is glowing, then you just went and knocked on the door to make sure everything was okay. And I thought that's really so interesting, because it's just space. It's like space is being created in our lives. And if we're not giving that space to go through those emotions or process whatever we need to process in our waking hours, then our body is like, knock, 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 3:30 in the morning. How is this time? Does this work for you? And I found that to be the sweetest time during my depression years a couple of years ago, that when I realized that it was normal and it was okay for me to be awake, because at 5:30 I was going to get tired and go back to bed for another hour and a half. And then I would need a nap. I'd need a 30-minute nap after lunch. But once I realized, oh, this is just a new rhythm in my life, it let go of that internal voice that was like, what's happening? What's wrong? Why can't I sleep? Why can't I, and the process.
I've been having that a lot lately. I've been going through periods of insomnia where I wake up at 4 and then I can't sleep till I go to bed at like 10 or 11 the next night. So maybe I'll have to consider that.
Consider the rhythm 11. Is changing.
Well, when you wake up at 4 a.m. every day, you have to go to bed at 10 or 11.
Yeah.
Oh my word. If I woke up at 4, I'd be in bed by 8:30. What are you guys talking about?
Val, when you say your friend Tracy, are you talking about your friend Tracy or our friend Tracy?
Our friend Tracy.
Okay,
I
so
only have
our
one
friend
friend Tracy.
Yeah. Okay. So Tracy and I have talked about that as well, because Eric and I actually we struggled with my sleep cycles for years, because he, as a husband who wanted to take care of his wife, tried everything to get me to sleep better, to get me to sleep more soundly, even with all the nursing babies and all of this. And I was just like, this is just what is, what it is, and like, it wasn't bothering me. It was my rhythm, and it worked. But it became the struggle where he thought I wasn't trying, that I wasn't like, that I didn't care about my health and all this. But I was just like, it would cause me more stress to fight it than to accept it. So what you're saying about being like, what's wrong, that panic, like I've never really had that panic. Because
awesome.
very early I read an article that was talking about how somebody had to keep the fires going, and how historically there have just been people on different sleep rhythms, and they were the people who would keep watch over the turrets, in the castle at night, and walk that path, and they were the people who'd keep the fires burning, and people would married people would get up and have relations in the night while all the kids were still sleeping. And there were just all these different historical and worldwide situations where people just, like, nighttime was not just for sleeping. And so I've been like, these people with ADHD that are just cycled differently from everybody else, and they're not even ready for anything to start shutting down until 2. Somebody has to be that person, because around 2 is when my kids stop getting up for glasses of water or to go to the bathroom. And I feel like the house, because they've gone to sleep and then they wake up and they need something, or they had a bad dream. It's usually at the beginning part of the night. And I was like, I would be so frustrated if I was getting woken up from my sleep for these things, but I'm already awake, doing my own stuff, having my own peace time. And so it doesn't bother me when they wake up and need something. I can just help them and send them off to bed. And then around 2, the whole house goes to sleep. And so that, not fighting against it, has been really big for me. And Eric, of course, would still prefer if our sleep cycles all just nicely matched up. But I was like, I don't think you realize how much people are getting up until 2 because you're sleeping.
Right. I'm more like your husband then in that sense. The other thing in this book that totally made me stop for a minute, I have a friend in Minnesota, Bobby, and she's been doing sauna experiences because she has one near her. And so in the wintertime, especially when she knows she's not getting enough warmth and sunshine, because she lives in Minnesota, she found a sauna and she goes and sits in it for 20 minutes. And it's been a nice experience. So she and I went and did that this summer for her birthday. But this book, In Wintering, she says she has a friend from Finland. And so they talk about the sauna. But the sauna experience is enhanced because of the cold weather in Finland. And so then she goes on this whole little dialogue about cold water swimming and whatever it does to trigger your brain to it sends something to your brain, a chemical to your brain that your brain actually needs to calm down anxiety and depression naturally. And so she begins teaching herself cold water swimming. I hate being cold. I live in Southern Iowa for a reason. I was in Minnesota. I'm moving south. I hate being cold. But I thought to myself, I think there's something to that, because every once in a while in the winter, I crave cold showers. And I think that's interesting too, where I'll have my warm shower, I'll do all the washing, and then I'm like, I'm going to turn it cold and see how long I can stay in the cold shower. And she thinks it's like a reset, not only for your body, but for your heart and mind as well, because it forces you to take a deep breath and be shocked a little bit by what you're doing. And she does these cold water swims in the channel. I think it's in the channel in England. But she says she won't do it alone. She realizes that this type of pain that you go seeking, or this healing that you're seeking,
it's very communal.
Is communal. It's best with a friend. So she finds one other woman who has actually struggled with anxiety and depression, wants to do the same thing. And they realize once they're doing it together, their tolerance for what they can handle is growing. So at first they can only get in, submerge themselves and get out. And by the end of the book, she says it's no problem now for them to get out, stand with their feet in the water for a while, go in for 30 minutes and come out. And this water is like 40 degrees Fahrenheit. It is cold. I was certified in scuba and the water was 56 degrees. And I thought I was going to get hypothermia and die. It was terrible. So she just sees her tolerance for that, but she knows that it's also communal and that she would have never done it, and nor would the lady had they not been doing it together. And I think that's really beautiful too.
I went to school up in the Upper Peninsula of Michigan, and the area was settled by Finnish people, and almost every house that was at all old had a sauna, and the dorm rooms did too. So it was very communal. People, college students, everyone would do the transfer back and forth between the cold lake water, and the saunas, and it's very communal and very wish we could do that here.
I want to say with the nighttime thing too, like 2:00 is an early night for me. There's a lot of nights where I can't get my brain to shut down until 3 or 4, but I have found that those have been some of the sweetest hours for being able to encourage other people, because it is well known on Facebook that I don't sleep. And so I have a lot of people reach out to me that need something in the middle of the night. And I feel it's almost a ministry being able to be there for them and encourage them. Or if they're sick and they're like, I'm too sick to even think about what to do next, like to be able to say, you should try this, this, and this. And they're like, awesome. I have all that on hand. I can go do that. But then it was able to be reciprocated. A year and a half ago, Leora found a couple screws when Eric brought stuff home from work and choked on them, and I was able to get one out and shove the other one down on accident. But we had to go in for it was better than her choking to death on it. Swallowing it was the better option. So we went in at, of course, things like this never happen if it's not bedtime. So, bedtime, I take her into the ER and she ends up having surgery to remove this thing. And she'd eaten a lot of green beans for dinner. And so the screw kept getting hidden in the green bean skins. So what was supposed to be in and out in 45 minutes was 2.5 hours of them digging through her stomach contents, trying to find this screw. And when they came out, this, every nurse and doctor that I talked to was like, your kid eats good vegetables. We can say that, It's like, yes, she does. But like I said, my husband knocks out. So he was home with the other kids and he fell asleep. And I felt so alone because I couldn't reach him if I needed to. And, what if something went wrong? And women across the country on Facebook stayed up with me until I got home at 4 a.m. They stayed up with me and they were texting every 30 minutes to get updates. And they were, finally, after 2 hours and 15 minutes of this surgery, I texted a few friends on the West Coast and I was like, this is where we're at with Lily. And they thanked me for waking them with the text so that they would have opportunity to pray for her. And within 15 minutes, they finally got the screw. But I didn't feel alone. And so I feel that there's that community aspect of just waiting with people, right? And it makes me think of when Jesus just wanted his disciples to stay awake while he was praying, and he's just like, all I wanted was to know that you were awake and you were in it with me even that much. And no one was in it with him. He was all alone. They kept falling asleep. And so just knowing that these women were in it with me and that they cared and they were praying for Lily and that they were checking in and invested and that they weren't going to bed until this was resolved was just really, it made me think, hopefully this is how other people are feeling when I'm there for them in the middle of the night, because otherwise the night can be very lonely because there's just less people on watch at that time. But Val, you said you had a poetry book.
Oh yeah.
I'm always interested in good poetry books.
Okay. So last year for our reading program, I had just popped into a library around here, 30 miles away. And I got a library card so I could check out this poetry book called All Along You Were Blooming by Morgan Harper Nichols.
But then you got a library card. How many library cards do you have now, Val?
I have 4, but it turns out you're not supposed to have that many. You're only supposed to have 1 or something. I don't know.
Okay. Become a new bonus library card.
But the nice thing is that rural Iowa understands the hard idea that like our little library can't get all the books, and even the library that I use the most can't get all the books. So you have to collaborate. So I think that's kind of a silly rule. Anyway, I started reading this. So last summer I still was kind of enveloped in depression. And so I just thought, I love poetry. And my friends are all like, you read poetry for fun? Like that was in school, but I love it so much. Maybe it's part of that Charlotte Mason education I'm handing my kids. But the artwork in this is so minimal and beautiful. And even that makes me cry sometimes. And so, I don't know. I just want to read one to you. It says, dive in beyond the reef. And what will you call it? What will you name this grand adventure? Will you call it Into the Deep? The day I finally learned to breathe. Oh, I'm starting to cry right now. The strength I did not know I would need, or will it simply be called Be? For after all, this is what you are doing. You are discovering the courage living inside of you is not as distant as it seemed. No matter how this season ends, you will walk away knowing what you did not know back then. This year will not end like last year, nor any other year before. And every single poem made me bawl. I was like sending Snapchats to my friend Shannon. And after a while, she's like, why don't I just buy the book? Because I think you just sent me 280 Snapchats. Everyone is empowering and beautiful, saying, hey, you're in a hard season and it's okay. Yeah. Take a breath. You won't always be here. I just think that is a message our country needs to know. I think women need to know it around the world. I think humanity needs to understand, just like that book where you say there are sweet people everywhere. We need to know that not everybody is polarized. Not everybody is filled with hatred. Not everybody wants terrible things to happen to other people, type of a thing. But seeking it out is like a little gift. It's like you can be sitting in a mall just watching people, right? Like, or a park, and be like, oh, wow, look at that. That person dropped something and the person right behind them picked it up for them. And that was really sweet. We forget that humanity has a good side as well, because our news will always hand us the yucky and the bad. But this one just reminds you that all along you were blooming. So the idea too, that seeds, you know, you don't just get a plant. There's this whole process into it. And we always just want quick, fast, perfect results. And that is not reality. Reality is there's hard and it's messy and it hurts. And sometimes you get a leaf that goes out this way and it has to be lopped off a little. Sometimes you think you're going to bloom into a red flower and it turns out you're just a green plant with red undersides on your leaves. You're not going to flower at all. So these are just some books that have really spoken to me. And I just love poetry. So I read this book. I've been reading it as my morning devotion. Don't tell anybody. It's not super spiritual or Christian. But it makes me feel like I can take a breath and be excited to hand that kind of encouragement to other women in my life that I know are struggling. So not at 3:30 in the morning, because I'm not waking up at that time anymore, but other times during the day.
Yeah. Well, you know what? I would push back on the thought that it's not very Christian, because I think that our humanity is one of the most Christian things about us, because we were created as humans. We were created with all of our emotional set. We were created to navigate on this earth, and God saw the creation and said it was good. So it's good to be human. And if those poems are helping you in your humanity to better understand yourself, to have a better outlook on life, then I think it's very in line with what God would have you be doing right now.
Yeah. I liked how she said, what are you going to call this grand adventure? Because depression and anxiety does not feel like a grand adventure, or even healing doesn't feel like a grand adventure.
A grand slog.
Yeah, right. I remember last summer saying to my friend Tony, all along I get kind of nervous about things, and I kept calling it anxiety, but I've been calling it the wrong word. This is excitement, but excitement with this terrible feeling that I'm just going to be disappointed. I'm really excited about this thing, but it'll probably turn out bad. And I realized I had to change some of my thought processes. And as soon as I did that, I could step away from that a little bit and be like, okay, this is excitement and I'm nervous, and that's okay. I mean, when you're going on a scary ride at, a theme park or something, and you get that feeling and you start to feel all sweaty and shaky, but it's okay to feel that way too, knowing that you're going to get on the ride. It's going to be safe and whatever. So I was able to identify some things after reading that poetry book, just like, oh, I'm actually feeling excited. And this isn't something I would choose for myself, but I'm so glad this healing has taken place in my life, and that there was a beginning and an end to mine, and it was fairly short. I mean, 2 years for depression is a pretty short time frame. But I'm thankful that I had those moments and I had the clarity to look into, like, it's okay that I'm going through this, even if I don't understand it, because I'm still growing and learning. So,
yeah.
Yep.
Yeah. Speaking of depression, I think it's really sad in our country how young we're seeing it in kids. Like, it's just younger and younger. Like, I'm sure that the shutdowns and losing school activities and all of that wasn't helpful for the stability for a lot of kids. But I think that something that I see in not our Facebook group, but in other book Facebook groups, is some of the hard issues that are being dealt with in kids' books right now and talked about. Parents are upset about it. They're like, my kid doesn't need to be reading about going to a therapist, or my kid doesn't need to be reading about, anxiety or hoarding or any of this stuff. And it's like, that's great. Praise the Lord that your kid doesn't have to deal with that. But odds are your kid's friends are dealing with it, or your kid is dealing with it and you just don't know. And this book, reading it, could give your kid words to talk to you about it, because maybe they don't know. Because it's like how they say that you need to teach your children the actual names of their body parts, because if they ever have cause to tell you that something bad happened to them, if they are using euphemisms, it won't hold up in court. They have to know what was touched. They have to know what happened to them and where it happened. And I think it's the same with emotions. If we don't give our kids the vocabulary for what they might possibly be feeling or experiencing or thinking about, then they're not going to be able to talk to you about it. And it's going to suffocate them, because it suffocated me as a kid to not have the word for things.
Well, and it'll also make them feel alone and like they're unique, and that no one else is having these thoughts or feelings.
And this is not a unique to you journey. There's nothing new under the sun. I flipped open a history book earlier this week from, like, I think it was like the turn of the century. And it was saying, why do we even need to study history? Like, in the introduction. And the person said, because anything that's been done before will be done again, or has the possibility of being done again. Anything that's been done before has the possibility of being done again. And so we need to know about it and study it. Because it was about, like, some wars that had been, I think it was about the Civil War. Like, why was the Civil War fought? It's like, anything that's been done before may be done again, and we need to know why. And so you talking about that poetry book, it sounds very life affirming. And this book by Cynthia Rowland is called Life. And it's one of the most life-affirming picture books that I have read in forever, but it touches on some of those darker themes. It has and the illustrator is Brendan Wenzel, and he's doing all those picture books on perspective, like with the cat. Like, there's 2 different picture books that he does that just are perspective that I think are amazing. The first time I read one of his books, I was like, I don't even know what's happening in these illustrations. This seems bizarre. I just flipped through it. But then I saw that it had all these awards and people were recommending it. And I was like, I need to, like, actually look at it again. And I looked at it again, and it's showing what a cat looks like from the perspective of other animals and how their eyeballs work. And I was like, that's why these things are distorted. Because if you're like a spider with like 100 eyes, or like all these different, if you have a fish eye, your view of things is very different. But that's great for perspective. Like, we all have different things and experiences in our life that create how we view things. And so if somebody can know this situation that was no biggie to you might be a biggie to someone else, or vice versa, because of your perspective, that's a really good concept to be teaching little kids about perspective. And then the other book that he does is about a cat and the cat's perspective of the world based on the house that the cat lives in and what it can see out of different windows, and how it's made a composite in its mind of what the world looks like from those window views. But then the cat leaves the house and is just blown away by what the world really looks like. And so he did the illustrations for this book, but he just was talking about how, like, life begins small, even for the elephants, and then it grows and it goes on and on. But then he talks about the dark stuff, and it kind of reminds me of Dr. Seuss's Oh, the Places You'll Go. It's like, sometimes you'll succeed and sometimes you won't, because sometimes you don't. But this one says, life is not always easy. And it has this little tiny bluebird flying through a storm. And it says, there will probably be stretches there will probably be a stretch of wilderness now and then, but wilderness eventually ends, and we see the bluebird finally flying out of the wilderness. But it has this one page that I really liked, and it says, "And if one day it seems that nothing beautiful will ever come your way again, trust the rabbit in the field and the deer who crosses your path. Trust the wolf and the wild geese who find their way back home." And I was just like, oh, that's like really good. And it's like all these know something about life, that everything is changing. And it is, I'm going to cry. And it is worth waking up in the morning to see what might happen.
Yeah.
And it just has this little seal with the great whales. But it's just like, man, like if this is one of those books that I'm just going to start giving to college students leaving home, like when you're out there alone and it's getting rough and you're in a wilderness and it feels like, the sun's not going to come back up. It is worth waking up tomorrow to see what might come. Like, it's worth it. It is like, it's going to feel really dark for you. And it's felt really dark for other people before, but it's worth it to keep waking up in the morning. So I loved that picture. It's like, so good. But Amanda, I feel like all of Val's books make me think like, oh, that goes with my book. They're all book buddies. And so I have an answer from you.
Well, I have one that went with the adulting type, but I didn't want to talk over people. So you had me read, you let me borrow Unbetrothed.
Yes.
And that very much seemed on par with growing children to leave the house and preparing them, because in this book she is a princess who is she actually I didn't feel like her parents actually prepared her very well. She's getting married and she just has to choose a spouse, and she can't choose the person she wants to choose. And so as this princess, she has to be leaving, growing up and like, oh, by the way, go pick a spouse now. It's up to you. Here's a ball. Here's all your suitors. Pick one. And so I didn't know if that would classify as a healthy preparing your child. But then she ends up going on this like hero's journey, and is more prepared along the way to fulfill these roles in the future. There's some not mystical, there's some magical type elements where they have a lot of these people have these gifts where they can do some sort of special abilities, and she goes on this journey to find her gift. But that reminded me very much of the preparing, and she goes into this journey totally unprepared for the things that it will take. And she finds herself in bad situations because she's not ready for it yet, but she becomes ready along the way. But that really reminded me of the readying your children to be adults, and it was very interesting. There's a little more cuddling with a love interest that you barely know than I was like totally wanting my child to read about.
But for YA fiction,
fiction, there was just some like,
very
he's
reserved.
So cute as he puts his arm around me, as opposed to a lot of the more heavy stuff that is. As the mom, I'm going, you barely know him. You've known him like what, 5 days? But at the same time, her parents are expecting her to just pick a suitor and get married. So
yeah. For what it's worth, I have a very good friend, and she has a little brother, and her mom met and married their stepdad in 5 days. And it is now 30 years later, and they are one of the happiest couples that I have ever known. But can you imagine being such a good man that you are willing to marry a single mother and her 2 kids that you have known for 5 days, but like you're that serious about it and you are going to make it work? And like I've known her for 19 years now, and like he's just a good man, and he was willing to take it on and knew that he could, and he did, and he rocked it. So I'm just saying, I understand your whole don't put the armor up. I mean, they got married after 5 days, Amanda.
Yeah, I get that. That as a mother, I would be. Yeah. I've seen that go down very badly, where it's more of a predatory. I'm going to marry you because I know you don't have a lot of. No, it's not funny. It's not funny.
No, I know.
I've seen it go very much the other way, where like abusers.
I know that my story was the outlier.
Yeah,
I do. So, I'm just teasing
I'm like,
you.
I know I'm a little bit more of a prude. I love Jane Austen, and I'm more like the yeah, it's okay if you don't kiss till you get married. That's great. I know that's not realistic.
Okay, well, Amanda, you made the comment that she goes on this hero's journey, and all of a sudden this idea popped in my head. I even wrote it down: a hero's journey, preparing your child to grow up. Because maybe I'm trying too hard to grow my kid up. Here's the list. Do you have all the things? Maybe what our kids need are hero's journeys. Isn't that why we offer them these beautiful books? Like, have the hero's journey, read the book, understand where they're coming from, because her parents totally unprepared her for life, but life prepared her for what it needed to prepare her for.
Yeah,
I mean, most of us don't just crawl into a hole and cry. You know, some of us marry men after 5 days who are going to take care of you. And some people find that they marry men they shouldn't have married even after 5 years of being with them.
Yes.
So a hero's journey. I'm going to do it, ladies. I'll be at a conference later next year. That will be the title of my speaking thing, will be a hero's journey, preparing your child to grow up.
Yeah.
Oh,
I like that.
Nice.
I definitely am somebody who just like reads the title of a book and maybe the back of it, and then forms like all these opinions based on just that amount of thought that I've received. And I was reading a book on reading, and it basically was saying that's entirely appropriate. Like, some books, that is what they will give to you. They will give you their title, they will give you their subtitle, and that's enough for you to now think. And that's really the goal of books, is for you to think.
Right.
And so on that idea, I saw an article that I shared with some friends last year because I wanted to read it, and I'm just now realizing I never went back and read it. But the article was talking about how motherhood is very often the woman's hero journey. And I was like, oh, so like I've been sitting with just that thought of the title and the subtitle of the article for the last year, and just been like, yeah, like, how many trials and tribulations and overcoming is there in motherhood? And then you get to the end of motherhood and your journey's over, right? Like that journey's done, that time period of raising your children. And obviously you continue mothering through, but like the vast portion of your journey has been completed. And who are you at the end of it? Have you overcome? Have you come out the other end, your own personal hero version of yourself? Or did you just quit at some hard point in the middle? Or did your friends come along like Sam and just carry you through different times when you couldn't keep going on your own? But I thought that was a beautiful thought, because I was like, yeah, it does sometimes feel like, because they were saying, women don't get a hero's journey. Like, men always have these like things. And I was like, no, I'm with you. Like, motherhood, that is a hero's journey right there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
But did either of you have like one more book that stood out to you that you really wanted to share? Otherwise, I was going to share my nonfiction book that I brought for Val.
I had one more thing.
Yeah.
We were talking about, in previous week, we were talking about how having a shared book in a family gives you a shared language. And it was so funny.
Vernacular.
Because we were in Michigan over visiting family, and my in-laws were pet sitting for someone's dog, but they were stopping in to walk it and stuff. And so I wasn't there, but my daughter was striking up a conversation with some older guy about the Wingfeather Saga, because we just finished the third, The Monster in the Hollows. And so it was funny because my mother-in-law was like, she's having this conversation with this middle-aged man. Like, this is weird. How does she know how to talk to him? And when you have that shared books,
shared vernacular, is that what you're looking for?
The shared vernacular also gives you something to connect with people who seem like people that you'd have a really hard time connecting with otherwise.
Right.
So they were able to share book recommendations.
Yeah, I love that. That's beautiful.
I also love when our children surprise us. When they do things that we're like, oh, you went and had that conversation with that person because you both had read the book and had things to say about it. That's so beautiful.
And it reminds you that they are growing up. They will be an adult.
Absolutely.
And it's coming sooner than you think.
Yes.
We had my grandma's funeral 2 weekends ago, I think, or last weekend. I don't know. That's all a blur. 2 weekends ago, we had my grandma's funeral finally. And she was so lovable, and she was friends with a lot of my sisters and my friends. So some of my sisters' boyfriends or lifelong friends showed up for the weekend, and so one of the guy friends showed up, and he's a pharmacist out in Colorado, and constantly reminding people he has his PhD, and so he was sitting there talking with my sister Sharon and Inara, and Hamilton came up. And he said something about how, the vice president, what did he say? He had some convoluted statement about who he thought had killed Hamilton. And he was like, Jefferson. He's like, I think Jefferson killed Hamilton. And Nara's like, no. And he's like, yeah, no, it was a vice president or something. And he walked off, and Nara's like, I just had to follow him. I walked off after him, and I was like, I think what you mean is Jefferson's vice president killed Hamilton. And he's like, yeah, no, I don't think that's what it was at all. And he he looks it up on his phone, and he's like, oh yeah, that's who it was. Yeah, okay, that's definitely what happened. And then all condescendingly, he turns to her and he's like, I think that they made a movie, a Broadway musical about it. Maybe you should watch that. And she looks at him and she's like, have you watched that? He's like, no. And she's like, if you had, you would have known the answer to this question. She's like, and for the record, my mom has watched that every night for the last 6 months. So I understand what happened in the story. It's true. This is what we do. Gemma goes to bed, and Nara's up for another hour, and I'll be working on the computer, and we'll just watch the next few songs from wherever we'd stopped the night before on the Hamilton. It's just our soundtrack in the background while we're doing whatever we're doing. But it inspired her to go and read the landmark on Hamilton and Burr, and she's reading a biography on Jefferson now. And so now she's getting the real history, and she's really excited about it, and she's finding out some really interesting things. But that was her launching point. So when Ian's just running his mouth about how, well, if you understood history, you would know that this, and this happened. And she's like, yeah, no, nobody, this, and this happened. Right. And maybe this movie you're recommending to me might be a good starting point for you.
Oh, my word. Well, as we're finishing up here, I do want to say thank you, Amber, because the last time I was on, at the very end, you were talking, well, maybe it didn't make the cut, but afterwards we were talking about the book Rebecca. Yeah. And I was like, I'm just going to smile and laugh and act like I know what you're talking about, because I don't. And then later you texted me.
You played it very well.
Thanks. And you said, you don't know that book. You've got to look it up. It's amazing. So my public library had it. So I got it. Uh-huh. I have coffee with a lady every week. And so she's like, you haven't read that book. Let's do it together. So just this summer, due to this podcast and your recommendation, I did read Rebecca. I read it Memorial Day. It took me 5.5 hours to read that giant book. It is still messing with my brain a little bit. I initially told you I did not like that story, but I am still thinking about it 7 weeks later.
Yeah, it stays with you.
Yeah. And my friend and I got together at a coffee shop, and she had printed out questions to talk about of things I hadn't even thought about. Like, does this represent this? And does this represent? So that was another fascinating 2-hour conversation we had about it. And I think this weekend, my husband said, let's sit down and watch that movie, because my friend says it does deviate from the book. But he says, you have talked about that book enough now. I want to see the movie, and then I want to know what you think.
Is he going to read the book first?
He will not read the book first, but he will see the movie. And if that intrigues him, then he'll listen to
the Hitchcock movie. Watch the Hitchcock movie with him. Because it's not Hitchcock. Who is it? Who made Rebecca?
I don't know. There's a new one. Are you talking?
Yeah. But there's like the old black and white one. Watch the old black and white one first.
Should we watch the old one? Okay.
Yes. It's so close to the movie or to the book that then he will at least have a firm understanding of what did happen. And then watch the new one. And then you guys can compare and contrast together because he'll have a good foundation for the true story. So I'll text you. I think there may have been a couple old ones made. So I'll text you the one that is really true. Yeah. No, I know because I keep saying it's Hitchcock over the years and people are like, it's not Hitchcock. And they're right. It's not Hitchcock. It felt like Hitchcock to me as a kid. It creeped me out as much as Rear Window did. I was like, I can't handle this. But I'm glad that you gave it a chance and read it. And I'm glad that you were able to have so many good conversations with your friend because of it. And I think that's why I liked it, because it's not just one of those thrillers where like you read it and you get to the end and now you have the answer and it's over. It sticks with you. It doesn't matter like how many years it's been since you've read it. If somebody says Rebecca, your brain's like, oh yeah, that was an experience.
Right. This is Danvers.
Yes.
I saw on I saw a sticker the other day that just had Mrs. Danvers and like all these flames behind it, and it's like Team Rebecca.
That's awesome.
I have a seed packet of Danvers carrots, and I can't stop thinking about Rebecca when I see them. Should I eat these?
So funny.
I don't know.
Okay, I'm gonna do the nonfiction book review, and then we will wrap up. So this book is hysterical. I called Tracy last night. I FaceTimed her and read it to her and the kids at bedtime. And when I got to the funny part, she was like, I thought I misheard you. Like, there was no way that's what happened. And I was like, oh, that's what happened. So this book is called Almost Nothing, Yet Everything. Its subtitle is something like A Book About Water. I believe that's what the subtitle is. So it's just, A Book About Water is the subtitle. It's just very proper. The back of the book says, this is a book about water and how it is the source of everything, but also inside all that is alive. It's a story that immerses the reader into the lushness of nature and the sparkling flow of life. It's about paying attention and honoring the element, just oxygen and hydrogen, that allows us to be. Okay, I'm going to tell our listeners, if you want to read a very funny book, check out Almost Nothing, Yet Everything from your library and read it with your kids. And you probably want to end the podcast now. This is the last book we're talking about. You can walk away because I'm going to spoil it right now. So this is your spoiler notice for Almost Nothing, Yet Everything. First of all, this is one of the most lusciously illustrated books I have read in forever. I just want to sit and look at the brush strokes for a very long time. And Tracy kept saying that. She's like, that is so beautiful. And it is. So I think it's really cool how the illustrator does these like crayon outlines, like makes their own picture frame on all the illustrations, which is just a fun little thing. And the authors are Chinese, and I thought they were Hispanic. I didn't look. I thought it was a Hispanic book because I thought these were sombreros that these two characters are wearing in every picture. But now I think they're umbrellas, and I need to like research it and figure out what exactly they are, because like in this, right, it looks like they are on their heads. And I thought that they were just these really awesome sombreros. But then in other pictures, they're like over their shoulders or like next to them. And it's not very clear. But so they have these not sombreros, and the author and illustrator are both from provinces. But that looks like a sombrero reflection in the water, okay? Not sombreros. So it's this beautiful story. So if I was putting together a Charlotte Mason curriculum, I would read this book right next to A Drop of Water, because that's how I roll. And this book says things. It's this beautiful poem. It runs clearer than anything. It has no color, but it can be any color. Are these illustrations not gorgeous? Like, I'm pretty sure these are oil paintings. Like, if you look at the brush strokes going on here, it's just beautiful. It has no shape, but can take any shape. You can touch it, but you can't hold it. Even if you slice into it, it won't be cut. It can slip through your fingers like it's nothing at all, but life would be unthinkable without it. How beautiful is that? These hands pooling water. So it goes on and on. It's just beautiful. It talks about how it's just hydrogen and oxygen. It flows like tears. It rains down like falling stars. Cascades and courses. It fills and overflows. Only oxygen and hydrogen. Simple as can be. Keeps going. Beautiful, beautiful, beautiful. It is the pee of life. Then the child asks, is it the pee-pee of the gods? It sure is, I answer. And then I wrote this poem. It is this. I'm sure the program's gonna like edit out all my laughter here.
Oh,
but
my word.
Like, I'm dying. It's all these gorgeous illustrations, this beautiful poem about life and water, and it's just stunning. These little ducks in the water, like, it's gorgeous. The poem's gorgeous. But let us not forget that water is just the pee of life. What just happened?
Yes.
So I read to Tracy and I'm like, it is the pee of life. Long dramatic pause, nothing from her. And I'm like, she didn't hear me. And I continue, is it, then the child asks, is it the pee-pee of the gods? And she's like, no, you actually said what I thought you said. I was like, oh, I said it all right. She's like, what just happened? I was reading it alone in the van. I was guffawing. I was laughing so hard because I was so into it. I'm like, this is a beautiful poem. What a beautiful nature book. I'm so glad I checked this one out. I'm sharing this with all my friends. And then it's like, it is the pee-pee of the gods. What just happened? So yeah, if I was putting together a Charlotte Mason list, I would definitely put this book on it because the illustrations are gorgeous. I'm still gonna like go back and look at this. Tracy was like, I want my money back. I was like, oh no, you don't. I'm buying my own copy. Oh yeah. But it's you
and I feel like there's a large Sorry,
what?
Go on. What were you saying?
Oh, I just said
I was just
no
gonna
warning.
Say,
no warning at all.
Yeah. And doesn't it feel like life? Like beautiful, gentle, educational, funny.
Yeah.
See, we miss that part, I think, too often.
Yeah.
So well done to those authors and illustrators.
I agree. And like sometimes we just take things too seriously. And I think that if you have a kid that's in the doldrums about homeschool and they're just over it, throw this book in. It will catch them by surprise. They will be like, Mom has a sense of humor or Dad has a sense of humor. And they'll be like, maybe science isn't the worst thing ever because I just learned that water's hydrogen and oxygen and the pee-pee of the gods. Like, I can hold those two beliefs side by side.
Absolutely.
So on that note, thank you for coming, Val. We really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Yes, thank you.
Thank you, everyone, for spending some time with us. And I hope that the Almost Nothing Yet Everything book brightened your day instead of ruined it. And go ahead and look at the show notes. We'll have all the books listed that we talked about here today. And we will also have a link to the other episode that Val was in if you want to hear more about the private library going public. And we want to remind you that the stories are truer than true, and have a great afternoon.